Hello, everyone. It's me, Jeremy Senpai. Alright, let's do this one more time. That's right, everyone. We're going back into the Spiderverse. So, I just want to say that I finally got to see the sequel, Across the Spiderverse, and I just knew I had to talk about it. So I decided to wait about a week, letting my thoughts still be a bit fresh, but at the same time having enough time to process fully. And well, I think I'm finally ready to talk about everything that Across the Spiderverse has to offer. But before getting into that, I just want to say that as Spider Man fans, as webheads, we have been eating good these past few years. I mean, when it comes to Spider Man media, we have definitely been doing pretty good. Well, I'll start with the obvious. Disney Plus finally gaining the rights to have all of Spider-Man media and play on it, whether it's the Sam Raimi trilogy, The Amazing Spider-Man, or the MCU Spider-Man, but also the cartoons like the animated series, Spectacular Spider-Man, and so on and so on. But like I said, we have definitely been doing great when it comes to Spider-Man in media. For example, we have the Tom Holland trilogy, we have the PlayStation games. For example, we have the original Spider-Man that came out in 2018. Then we got the spin-off where you got to play as Miles Morales. And coming this October will be the sequel, Spider-Man 2, where you get to play as both Peter Parker and Miles Morales. And now for the big one right here, we have the Spider-Verse movies. The first one is Into the Spider-Verse, which came out in 2018, I believe. And now we have its follow-up sequel, Across the Spider-Verse. And of course, we've got the part 2 coming out, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but is called Beyond the Spiderverse, which will be released in less than 10 months' time. So yeah, the webhead is doing pretty good for himself. Honestly, this entire movie is basically one big love letter to Spider-Man, especially in animation. I mean, we've got glimpses from the comics, we've got glimpses from the live-action movies, we've got a reference to the MCU, like in the beginning battle where we have Gwen and Miguel fighting against the Renaissance Vulture. Miguel makes a reference to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, where he talks about Stephen Strange and that kid on Earth. I forget the exact number. Whoever knows it, feel free to share in the comments. But like I said, they made a reference to to No Way Home, the Spider-Man movie that came out about 3 to 4 years ago, I believe. Honestly, there is a lot to digest here. There is so much to talk about. But I think I've gone far enough, but I have to say it. Spoilers alert if you're not fully caught up on the Spider-Verse movies. I suggest that you rewatch Into Spider-Verse and go see Across the Spider-Verse. If you don't really care that much, then here we go. Okay. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how much I adore these movies. In fact, the one scene that I think I have rewatched the most from Into the Spider-Verse is the scene after Aaron Davis's death, also known as the Prowler. Miles is beside himself, he's lashing out, and then we see Peter, we see Gwen, Spider-Man Noir, Penny, and Peter Porker of Spider-Ham. They all come into his dorm room to comfort him. Um, Peter B. Parker starts with, for me was my Uncle Ben. Spider-Man Noir goes off with, for me, it was my Uncle Benjamin. Penny goes off, for me, it was my father. For Gwen, for me, it was my best friend. Spider-Ham, he doesn't share who his Uncle Ben was. He doesn't share who he lost, which I think is kind of relevant because he says, Miles, the thing about this job is you can't always save everybody. And that is so powerful because we have this cartoon Spider-Man who is a pig, looks like he stepped right out of Looney Tunes, and he probably has the most powerful line, the most powerful relevant line, that Miles can't always save everybody. Miles lashes out a bit. He says, "It was my fault, you wouldn't understand." But Gwen shoots back too, saying, "Miles, we're probably the only ones who do understand." And I love that line right there. It is probably my favorite line in the whole Into the Spiderverse right there. Because, yeah, who else is gonna understand than a Spider-Man what it's like to lose? And you know what? I'm going to touch a bit on the MCU Spider-Man trilogy, like in No Way Home, where we have Tom Holland Spider-Man meeting the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. Just like in Into the Spider-Verse, we have Holland, Peter Parker lashing out a bit, saying how they wouldn't understand. But we have Tobey and Andrew saying that they both lost somebody. They lost their Uncle Ben's. To add to Andrew Garfield's, he says that he lost his Gwen. So, yeah, who else would understand but a Spider-Man, or in this case, a spider hero? Who else would understand? Am I right? They are probably the only ones who would understand. And that actually plays a very keen point when we get to the term of canon events. Okay. For starters, I'm going to have to explain what a canon event is considered to be. It's basically considered to be the set history inside media, or in this case, the events that allow a Spider-Man or a spider hero to be a hero. You've heard all before, you have the hero that gets bitten by a spider, they lose somebody important to them, whether it was Uncle Ben or Aunt May or whoever. And then of course they realize that they need to become the hero that's needed. So yeah, when I say canon event, I'm talking about history that exists inside that media. Or in this case, what exists for every spider hero. They gain their powers, they learn the consequences if they don't use their powers properly, and in doing so, they become heroes, and better heroes even. I really do love that right there because it plays a whole new meaning when we get to Across the Spiderverse, especially when we have Miguel O'Hara, who there's definitely a lot to say about Miguel O'Hara later down the road. There's a lot to say, but we'll cut to that when we cut to that. Okay, first of all, being a spider hero, obviously what Miguel is doing goes against everything that they stand for. That they would try to reduce horrible events best that they can, with what they can anyway. But Miguel, who's probably been through the ringer so many times, or at least as he claims, because he tried to exist in another world that lost its Miguel O'Hara, only for that universe to fall apart. So he is a bit desensitized, he is a bit much, and if we compare this Miguel O'Hara to the comic versions, just like with most Spider-Man, he has a sense of humor, but he's definitely a much more serious Spider-Man by comparison. But that being said, he still has the wisecracks, he still has the good sense of humor that is synonymous with being a Spider-Man, but in this case, he is just so far gone. He reminds me of time travel characters, like Okabe from Steins Gate, Homura from Madoka Magica, Subaru from ReZero, who have gone back in time. They've gone back in time dozens of times, hundreds of times, trying to save somebody important to them, trying to make a better outcome, only for that important person to die, this time under different circumstances or settings, and then they go back in time again. Lather, rinse, repeat. And by that point, they have had enough. They're at their breaking point by this. That is literally what popped into my head when I heard Miguel O'Hara's story, where he tries to replace himself. Where he tries to live in the other universe of the other Miguel O'Hara. That's what popped into my head. These characters from anime who have time traveled for good reasons, but it keeps blowing up in their faces when they look over the bodies of people that they love. Whether it's Mayuri, or Rem and Amelia, or Madoka. They stand over the bodies of people that are important to them, and then they have to time travel again, hoping for a better outcome. Yeah, that does a lot to somebody emotionally. Trying again, failing again, and not making any progress when you fail again. But when we move ahead, we see Miguel O'Hara put together his little spider society, and there is a lot to process. At first, I was like, okay, there's no way that all these... From what I've read, there's over 200 spider heroes. There's a version of Flash Thompson if he became a spider hero, but he doesn't have web shooters because I'm guessing he wasn't smart enough to make them. There's a spider cat. There's a spider buggy that kind of reminds me of that Doom buggy thing from Hanna-Barbera cartoons. I don't remember his exact name, but you know the one. He's orange, kind of belongs to a bit of a Scooby-Doo mystery solver gang. We have a Lego Spider-Man. We had the Spider-Man with 6 arms. We have a T-Rex Spider-Man. We have a Spider Knight, a Western Spider-Man. And you will have to think to yourself, okay, some of these have to be made up. But nope. Nope, I looked into it, and almost every one of those spider heroes is relevant. They have existed in pre-existing media, whether it was a cartoon, whether it was part of a Lego set, whether it was a comic, or even just a one-off character. They existed in some form of Spider-Man media. Heck, even the T-Rex existed. Even the frickin' T-Rex Spider-Man. I remember when I first saw it and I was like, okay, they have to be making this up. But nope. Apparently there is a T-Rex Spider-Man. He apparently exists in a Jurassic World. There was a meteor that crashed in front of him that was filled with radioactive spiders, which is how he became a spider T-Rex man, I guess. You can't make this up. I wish I was making it up, because I feel that if I made it up, it would make a little bit more sense, but... I mean, it's crazy. It's obscure comic book crazy, so... Okay. But anyway, when we get further down, we also see video game references that go back to, like, the Sega and Nintendo starting days. Heck, we even got the Insomniac PlayStation Spider-Man for a brief second. It's only a brief moment, but you should be able to recognize him. He is the Spider-Man who's wearing a white spider instead of the other usual colors. Not that hard to distinguish, and as far as I know, he is the only Peter Parker Spider-Man that has a white spider. If I'm wrong, then feel free to correct me, but that's as far as I know. And of course, we even have the Spectacular Spider-Man. We have the Spider-Man Unlimited from the 90s. We have the 1960s Spider-Man coming in. And he was even hinted at the end of Into the Spiderverse, where we have Miguel O'Hara literally going back to the beginning, going back to the 1960s to recruit that first animated Spider-Man. So yeah, you thought it was just a one-off gag? Nope, it was relevant. And I freaking love that. I love that it got played back again. And I just want to point out that in preparation for watching Across the Spiderverse, I immersed myself in Spider-Man media. I rewatched the Sam Raimi trilogy. I watched the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. I rewatched the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. I even watched playthroughs of Spider-Man PS4 and the Miles Morales one. And I even watched, for the very first time, the Spider-Man, the animated series from the 90s, and Spectacular Spider-Man. And for record, when it comes to Spectacular Spider-Man, there is a whole lot to unpackage. And I fell in love with that series instantly, but so I don't get too off topic, I'm only going to stick to his involvement here in Across the Spider-Verse. But now that I've seen it, I have to rewatch it once, maybe two more times, just to talk about it in the future podcast video. It's worth noting that the Spectacular Spider-Man, he very surprisingly agrees with Miguel, telling Miles that all this has to happen. And yeah, it's definitely been a long time since we've seen him. Obviously, he's been through the ringer. As far as we know, he probably underwent his own little canon event that took place after the series ended. Maybe he lost his Aunt May. He might have lost his Gwen for all we know. So, yeah. I just want to point out that it really surprised me that he would go along with it. That was definitely a bit of an eye-opener, but at the same time, kind of makes sense at the same time. And I really love the scene right there where we have like the whole intervention scene. We have all of the spiders literally coming together to try and convince Miles that his father has to die, that there is a formula, there's an algorithm to this where a captain has to die. And we even get references to this. In the original Spider-Man comics, we have Captain George Stacy who dies, and the iconic scene where he tells Peter to protect Gwen. And then we cut right over to the Amazing Spider-Man, movie, where we see the same thing. We have Captain George Stacy dying in Spider-Man's arms, but this time he's telling Spider-Man not to get Gwen involved. Very big difference, which honestly I'm not a big fan of. But it's also definitely a lot more relevant down the road, because when we get to Spider-Man India, where we have the father of his girlfriend about to die, yeah, that definitely adds a whole new territory to it, where we have a police captain who does play a role in the Spider-Man world, in the Spider-Man overarching world, has to die for whatever reason. And as far as we know, almost every spider hero had to go through it. We do know that Gwen would eventually save her own father, who is a police captain, but at the same time, because she's gone off script, so to speak, the fact that she kind of ruined her own canon event by disappearing for a few months, it also adds this anomaly where, yeah, you can go off script. You don't have to follow the canon event. But I'll get back on that a bit later. And then we hit the real gut punch here. Not only do we have Peter B. Parker and Gwen telling Miles to let it happen, but we even have Penny Parker. And my god, the poor girl has been through the ringer. For the record, Miles is probably about 15 to 16 years old, and Penny, by looks of things, could be 12 to 13. So she is probably one of the youngest members of the whole Spider Society. And compared to where she was in the original movie, where she was lighthearted and optimistic, she looks like that she has been through the ringer. She doesn't say anything really, she just kind of convinces Miles by showing up. And I just want to point out that when it comes to Penny, her comic is set in a futuristic world that does take inspiration from mecha anime, specifically shows like Gundam and Evangelion. And I just want to point out both of those series are dark. So, given the fact that they took the initial inspiration for Penny Parker, we can only assume that by this point in her life, her canon event has come to pass. Maybe she went out of her way to. Maybe she went out of her way to try and prevent it. Maybe she tried to prevent it and it failed. Maybe it turned out even worse. But either way, she is through the ringer, and she just tells Miles that you just have to let it be. Obviously, she's not pleased with it, but at the same time, she has to accept it. And I just want to point out, whoever did this to my baby girl, whoever took away that smile, you better sleep with one eye open. And I would definitely love to know more about Penny's story when we get to the sequel next year, Beyond the Spiderverse, because I would love to know what happened. It could just be a quick 5-minute conversation, and I would perfectly be happy with that. Alright, now before moving along, we have to talk about the Spot. Okay, the Spot, he definitely has that whole make of a villain of the week kind of thing. He's clumsy, he's awkward, he's kind of a villain, but at the same time he's not. He's not a super big threat, he's kind of a threat without meaning to be. And the fact that he considers himself Miles' nemesis, because his story kind of relegates to Miles' own origin story. So, like I said, he's a comedic villain, but he's a comedic villain done right. The fact that he unintentionally becomes the big threat. He starts off as he is the big threat for the first half of the movie, and we think that it's going to be resolved, but nope. Looks like we have to touch on his story when we get to Beyond the Spiderverse. I mean, he definitely has vibes that he doesn't really want to be a villain, and yet at the same time, he kind of accepts it as his lot in life. Meaning, I don't want to do this, but at the same time, I'm doing this. He blames Miles for the whole thing, and he just kind of sees it as his lot in life, you know? There's definitely a lot to talk about when it comes to the Spot, but I feel like that I can't do his character justice unless I see the follow-up in part 2 next year. Okay, now back to what I said about Miguel O'Hara. He definitely has this whole ends justify the means sort of thing. It's basically a reference to the whole trolley trick or trolley problem where you have to sacrifice one person to save multiple people, or you have to save one person, but you deny the multiple other people that can be saved. Basically, imagine this scenario. There's a train incoming. You're at the track switcher. And on both sets of tracks, you have one person tied up, and on the other, you have 5 people tied up. No matter what you decide, there's going to be consequences. And when it comes to Miguel O'Hara, he knows that's wrong, but at the same time, he is so desensitized. He is convinced that if they step out of line even a little bit, there will be consequences. Imagine this scenario, if you will. You and your friends are playing Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing game. You're well aware that there's an overarching narrative. You have a role to play. You all have a role to play in your respective stories. And if you try to deviate from that story at all, there are consequences. There are 10 times the consequences than there would be if you didn't stick to the original story. Yeah. Sorry, sounds like that there's mowing outside of my house. I don't know if it can be picked up or not, but if you do, I apologize for that. But like I said, if you try to deviate from the original story at all, from the original set story, there are consequences that are 10 times worse than there would have been. And I really love the whole exchange, the last exchange Miles and Gwen have. Gwen is being sent back to her universe, and she says her iconic line from the trailer, "We're supposed to be the good guys." She goes away, and then Miguel, damn it, this is getting confusing. Miguel, he says to himself, we are the good guys. And then he turns around and he sees all the other Spider heroes. He sees Peter and Ben and Jessica, and then he reaffirms to them, we are the good guys. But he says it with this tone, like he has to remind himself that we are doing the right thing. We are doing the right thing, this is horrible, but the ends justify the means. So, yeah. Miguel O'Hara definitely has the whole chaotic good about him, where he's okay with letting people die because, in the grand scheme of things, it's better than the alternative. Alright, now, let's see, where to go from here. Oh, right. Okay, now for the big thing right here, the ending. The ending that I doubt anyone else saw coming. Miles goes back to his world. He comes out to his mother, Rio, that he's Spider-Man, and then he's hit with it all. That she doesn't know who Spider-Man is. In other words, not just Miles, but Peter, any spider hero. She has no idea who Spider-Man is. And then in enters Aaron Davis. Uncle Aaron by Miles. The two have a quick exchange, and when they leave the apartment, the unthinkable happens. They are in a world that doesn't have a spider hero to protect it. We look at the big mural where in this world, Jeff dies. Captain Jeff Davis dies. Miles's father is dead. So the unthinkable does happen, but it happens on another world. And from the looks of things, it's been like that for a few months, if not years. And Aaron Davis already has it figured out. He knows that this Miles isn't his Miles. He takes him back to his apartment. He's tied up to a heavy bag, just like how Miles had Peter chained up. And then we're hit with the big sucker punch ending. Miles tells Aaron that he doesn't have to be the Prowler. There's this silence, and Aaron coldly says, "I'm not." Then in comes a smaller Prowler. His mask comes off, and he introduces himself, "I'm Miles Morales." And I love that. That's when it's revealed that Miles isn't back on his Earth. He's on the alternate Earth of Earth 42, I think, where... And this is actually where we have to get into the anomaly part of it, where Miles is Spider, and rewatching Into the Spiderverse, I saw the scene where Miles gets bitten, and we see the spider with the big 42 on it. First time watching, this could be a reference to how many spiders that there were made, but no, this is a reference to the world that spider came from. And we even see the spider glitching a bit, which you don't catch on the first watch. As you know, you glitch if you don't belong to that world. The spider glitches because it doesn't belong to the world Miles is from. So yeah, when Kingpin uses Collider for the first time, the 42 Earth spider ends up biting Miles, and not the Miles Morales from Earth 42. So yeah, rewatching both movies, this hits a whole new level of home. Miguel, because because our Miles Morales got bit by the spider, that means that the Earth 42 Miles didn't get bitten by the spider. Our Miles tries to tell his counterpart that he needs to save his father, but 42 Miles basically tells him, why would I do that? And he says it in this cold tone right here that tells me, I couldn't save my father. Why would I help you save yours? I mean, that right there is a serious gut punch, showing that Miles Morales of this world, Earth 42, is so numb and desensitized that he genuinely doesn't care. He is the prowler in this world, where we can assume that he is causing trouble. He's probably a thief, he's probably working for whoever pays him the most. He genuinely doesn't care. He didn't try to save this world as the Prowler. No, he decided to act out as the Prowler of this world. And Miguel even says it himself that our Miles was never meant to become Spider-Man. And since we get to the ending, we see the consequences of that. There was no Peter Parker in Earth 42. So in other words, Miles Morales of that world had to be the Spider-Man, had to be the spider hero, and because he wasn't, everything went to crap. There is no superhero to protect this world, so there is no hero in general, because, again, our Miles Morales got bit by the spider from another world. And that definitely hits home, too, because Miguel even tells Miles that the Peter Parker of his world wasn't meant to die. That Miles indirectly caused the death of Peter Parker from his world. Okay, first off, I want to say no, okay? It's not that simple. I'm not saying that Miles directly caused Peter's death, he indirectly caused it. And no, it's not his fault either. He didn't mean for it to happen. But Miguel does raise some good points in retrospect. You see, if Miles didn't get bitten by his spider, by the Earth 42 spider, then he would have no reason to go back to the spot where it happened. He would have no reason to come across Kingpin's super collider. He would have no reason to meet his Spider-Man, his Peter Parker. Peter Parker would have no reason to save Miles, to formally introduce himself, and even offer to be Miles's mentor. Peter only had a few minutes to talk with, like a couple minutes to talk with Miles, but in retrospect, it makes a whole lot more sense now. The time he could have spent talking with Miles, he could have worked that towards stopping Kingpin even further. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot to process right there. In the canon event, Miles wasn't supposed to be there. Our Peter Parker, his Peter Parker, would have stopped Kingpin, and everything would have gone back to the way it was before, with him alive and being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And that is definitely a gut punch right there. And I just want to point out, I really love that whole relevant storytelling in retrospect, because it makes you want to rewatch those movies, rewatch those specific scenes dozens of times, to make sure it's all canon and on the up and up. But anyway, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Feel free to tell me in the comments below. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the first two Spider-Verse movies. Obviously, I'm not going to really have anything else to really talk about until we get the follow-up next year. But anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed my little rant. This is Jeremy Senpai signing off. If you like more, feel free to hit like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And please, have a good day everybody. Jeremy Senpai is signing off.